You've been running, not towards something, away. Away from discomfort, from stillness, from the quiet voice inside that keeps asking, when does your life begin? You've been showing up for everyone else, answering the calls, carrying the weight, keeping the peace. And somewhere in all of that generous, exhausting effort, you lost the thread back to yourself. This is not a judgment, it's a mirror. There is a philosophy, ancient, battle-tested, forged not in universities but in exile, in slavery, on the front lines of empire, that speaks directly to this moment in your life, Stoicism, and at its very core is a truth so plain it almost offends. You can only work with what you control, your mind, your choices, your character, nothing else. Focus on yourself, not out of arrogance, not out of indifference to others, but because nothing, no relationship, no contribution, no achievement is built on an empty foundation. The Stoics knew this. Marcus Aurelius ruled the most powerful empire on earth and still carved out time every morning to tend to his inner world first. Epictetus, born into slavery, found freedom that no chain could reach because he went inward. So can you. It is never too late to turn toward yourself. That turn begins here. And if something in these words just landed, if you feel it, type "I choose me" below. Make it your first decision of this new chapter. Think about the last time you truly felt like yourself, not performing, not managing, not surviving, just fully, quietly present in your own life. For many people, that memory takes a moment to surface. Some can't find it at all. And that gap between who you are and who you've been pretending to be is exactly where exhaustion lives. We live in a world that rewards self-erasure. From the time we're young, we're taught that the good person is the one who gives more, asks for less, and never makes their needs the loudest thing in the room. Selflessness is celebrated, boundaries are frowned upon. Saying no is treated like a moral failure, and so we learn, very efficiently, to abandon ourselves in favor of everyone else's comfort. The result? You become a version of yourself that nobody designed and nobody asked for, a scattered, depleted person running on obligation rather than purpose. Seneca saw this pattern 2,000 years ago and called it out with ruthless clarity. He wrote about people who are busy about nothing, endlessly active, never truly productive, filling their days with the demands of others while their own interior life quietly collapses. He wasn't describing ancient Romans. He was describing you. He was describing all of us. Here's what nobody tells you when you're in the middle of it. The people you're running yourself ragged for don't actually need a hollowed-out version of you. Your children, your partner, your friends, your colleagues, they need the real you. The grounded, present, capable version. And that version can only exist if you've done the work of tending to yourself first. The scattered life feels noble from the inside. It masquerades as devotion. But at its root, there is often something less comfortable. A fear of sitting with yourself, of confronting what you want, of taking ownership of your own direction. It is far easier to stay busy with other people's lives than to face the quiet, demanding work of building your own. This is what the Stoics called living according to others rather than according to reason and nature. And they considered it one of the most dangerous ways a human being could spend their days. The first step towards something better is simply recognizing where you are. And if any part of this feels familiar, you're already halfway there. Marcus Aurelius was not born a philosopher. He was born an emperor, which, in the ancient world, meant he was born into a life defined entirely by external demands. The empire needed decisions, the armies needed leadership, the Senate needed managing, the citizens needed governing. Every single day of his life was, on the surface, about everyone else. And yet every single morning, before the empire got its hands on him, Marcus sat down and wrote to himself. Not for posterity, not for publication. These private notes, what we now call the meditations, were never meant to be read by anyone else. They were the practice of a man who understood, with unusual clarity, that if he didn't tend to his own mind first, he had nothing real to offer the world. He wrote about perception, about patience, about the difference between what disturbed him and what he chose to let disturb him. He was, essentially, doing what we might today call therapy. Except his therapist was Stoic philosophy, and his sessions started at sunrise. This is the Stoic mirror. It doesn't show you your face, it shows you your patterns. Epictetus, who came from the opposite end of the social spectrum, born into literal slavery, arrived at the same conclusion through a different path. His master once twisted his leg as a demonstration of power. Epictetus simply said, "You will break it." The leg was broken. Epictetus said, "Did I not tell you so?" No rage, no collapse. Because Epictetus had long since drawn a line between what was his and what was not. His body, not his. His freedom of movement, not his. His mind, his values, his response to suffering, entirely his. Untouchable. That is the foundation Stoicism offers you, not a detached, emotionless existence, not indifference to the people you love, but an absolute clarity about where your real domain begins and ends. Because here's the truth the Stoics kept returning to. When you live entirely in reaction to the external world, to other people's moods, opinions, needs, and crises, you are not really living your own life. You are living 1,000 fragments of everyone else's. The mirror shows you that, and once you've seen it clearly, it becomes very difficult to look away. There is a phrase that appears quietly in Marcus Aurelius's writings, one that the philosopher Pierre Hadot later named and made famous: the inner citadel. It refers to that inviolable space inside you, the place no external force can truly reach, the seat of your judgment, your values, your response to the world. The Stoics believed this was the most important real estate in the universe, and most people have never once visited it. Reclaiming that space is not a dramatic overnight event. It is a practice, and it begins with a deceptively difficult act: paying attention to yourself. Not the performance of yourself, not the version of you that exists in other people's eyes. The actual interior you, what you genuinely think, what you genuinely want, what genuinely disturbs your peace and why. Most people spend their whole lives one step removed from this. They know their opinions about politics, about their neighbors, about the latest news. But ask them what they actually value, what kind of person they're trying to become, what they want their days to feel like, and they go quiet. This is not stupidity. It is the natural result of never being taught to look inward. The Stoic practice of prososche, self-attention, was considered foundational. Before anything else, watch yourself. Not with judgment, but with the calm observation of a scientist. Notice when you react versus when you respond. Notice what drains you and what restores you. Notice whose voice is driving your choices. Is it yours, or is it an inherited script from someone else's expectations? This act of noticing is the beginning of reclamation. From there, the practice deepens. The Stoics used a technique we might call negative visualization, imagining not catastrophe, but simply the absence of what you take for granted: your health, your clarity, your time. Not to be morbid, but to be awake. When you remember that your attention is finite and your days are not guaranteed, it becomes much harder to justify spending them entirely in service of everyone else's agenda. There is also the discipline of the evening review, something Marcus Aurelius practiced and Seneca wrote about explicitly. At the day's end, what did you do well? What pulled you away from your best self? Not to punish yourself, but to recalibrate, to show up differently tomorrow. The inner citadel is not built in a weekend, but every day you choose to look inward rather than scatter outward, you lay another stone. And over time that structure becomes something no external storm can easily tear down. Let's address the thing that stops most people before they even begin: the guilt. If you were raised in a culture, or a family, or a faith tradition that equated self-focus with selfishness, then the idea of putting yourself first will feel like a moral transgression. There will be a voice, probably a very familiar one, that says, "Who are you to prioritize yourself? Other people have real problems. Other people need you." That voice is not wisdom. It is conditioning, and it is costing you everything. Here is what Stoic philosophy makes unambiguously clear. You are not separate from the people you love and serve. You are connected to them, which is precisely why your own condition matters so much. A depleted parent cannot be fully present. A burned-out leader cannot make clear decisions. A person running on anxiety and self-neglect cannot offer anyone around them real stability, real patience, or real love. They can only offer performance. The Stoics had a concept called oikiosis, a recognition that we are, by nature, connected to others, and that our flourishing is bound up with the flourishing of those around us. But notice what that means. Your flourishing matters. Your health, physical, mental, spiritual, is not a luxury. It is the infrastructure on which everything else is built. This is not an abstract idea. Seneca wrote directly to his friend Lucilius, "Tend to yourself first, not because others don't matter, but because the quality of everything you give is determined entirely by the quality of the person doing the giving." Think about it practically. When you are rested, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally rested, how do you show up? When you've had time to think, to breathe, to do something that restores you. What kind of parent, partner, friend, or colleague do you become? The answer is obvious, and yet most people treat that state as a reward to be earned rather than a foundation to be maintained. Putting yourself first means deciding with full philosophical conviction that your growth is not optional, that your mental clarity deserves protection, that your dreams, your goals, your becoming, these are not vanity projects to be pursued only after everyone else is satisfied. They are your primary responsibility. The Stoics would tell you this plainly. You owe yourself the same devotion you give so freely to everyone else. That is not selfishness. That is the most honest, most courageous, most genuinely loving thing you can do. Philosophy without practice is just decoration. The Stoics were ruthlessly practical people, soldiers, statesmen, teachers, and they built their wisdom to be used, not admired. So here is how you actually bring these principles into a modern life that is full, fast, and constantly competing for your attention. The first practice is what you might call the morning ownership ritual. Before you check your phone, before the inbox, before the news feed, before anyone else's needs land in your lap, you spend 5 to 10 minutes with yourself, not scrolling, not planning for others, just sitting with the question, what kind of person am I choosing to be today? This is exactly what Marcus Aurelius was doing in those pre-dawn writing sessions. He was claiming his mind before the world could fill it. you can do the same. The second practice is what Epictetus would recognize as the daily dichotomy check. Throughout your day, when you feel tension, anxiety, or resentment rising, ask yourself one question. Is this within my control? Your behavior, your effort, your response? Yes. Other people's choices, the weather, the traffic, the economy? No. When you train yourself to redirect energy away from the uncontrollable and back toward your own choices and character, something remarkable happens. You stop leaking. All that energy that was hemorrhaging into worry and comparison and performance begins to consolidate inward, where it can actually do something useful. The third practice is the evening audit, Seneca's personal favorite. At the end of each day, before you sleep, you ask 3 simple questions. Where did I act from my best self today? Where did I give my power away? What will I do differently tomorrow? This is not self-punishment. It is self-authorship. You are treating your own development as seriously as you would treat any project that genuinely mattered to you. The fourth practice is perhaps the most countercultural of all: deliberate solitude. Time spent alone, walking, journaling, sitting quietly, not as an escape, but as a return. The Stoics believed that if you couldn't be alone with yourself in peace, you had work to do. That discomfort you feel in silence is not emptiness. It is the gap between who you are and who you're becoming, asking to be closed. These 4 practices, morning ownership, the dichotomy check, the evening audit, and deliberate solitude, do not require a monastery. They require only the decision that you are worth investing in, and that decision, made daily, is the most stoic act available to you. Here is something the self-improvement world rarely says out loud. There is no right time to begin this work. Not at 25, not at 40, not at 63. The Stoics, who lived in a world far more brutal and far less forgiving than ours, believed this completely. The turn inward is available to you at any moment, including this one. Epictetus did not discover philosophy in youth. Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism itself, had his transformative turn after a shipwreck destroyed everything he had. He washed up on shore with nothing, walked into a bookshop, read Socrates, and changed the course of his life. Sometimes it takes losing what you thought you needed to find what was always there. You may be reading this at a point in your life where things have come apart. A relationship, a career, a sense of self you once relied on. Or perhaps nothing dramatic has happened at all. You're simply aware, in a quiet and persistent way, that you have been living at a distance from yourself. Either of these is enough. Either of these is exactly where the work begins. Marcus Aurelius wrote the Meditations in his 50s, at the peak of his worldly power, still grappling with the same inner struggles he'd faced as a young man. He didn't wait until he had it figured out. He practiced, imperfectly, repeatedly, without guarantee of arrival. That is the invitation here. Not perfection, not a complete overhaul of your life before Monday. Just a turning, a decision to make your own growth the primary project of your existence. To stop waiting for external circumstances to improve before you start living fully.